Welcome to Medical Portraits, a podcast where I talk to medical professionals with extraordinary stories to share. My name is Carl and I'm a physician specialized in internal medicine. I've always been fascinated by the diversity of the medical profession, and I also just love hearing stories of interesting personalities. That's why in this podcast, I sit down every 2 weeks and talk to inspiring people from the world of medicine. Today's guest is Tomer Barak, an internist who studied medicine in Tel Aviv and completed his residency in Boston. Along the way, he embarked on adventurous medical expeditions in South America, completed a master's in tropical medicine and international health in London, and worked in Nigeria and Botswana for almost a decade. As tensions rose in Israel, he returned home. Since then, he's been dedicating his time to building bridges between Palestinians and Israelis through his work as a physician and beyond. This is Medical Portraits, inspiring voices of medicine.
The usual trajectory is you go to medical school, you do an internship, and then you go immediately into residency. At some point, I realized it's a little bit, I've been doing too much cowboy medicine, and maybe I should, get some proper training first. When I was training in the US, I just felt there was such a richness of people who cared and invested in the work. I wanted to be somewhere where I can feel like I'm making a difference, a more substantial difference. I'm sitting now in Tel Aviv. A 40-minute drive from here is the Gaza Strip. People there are living under just unimaginable conditions. The healthcare system there that had always been struggling is virtually non-existent, and it's just horror upon horror. So many injured, there's just nothing to treat them with. There's no way to conduct operations because there's no anesthesia, there's no electricity. It seems banal, but violence is just not a solution. This is this is the lesson that we're learning, and we're being forced to learn again and again and again.
Thanks, Tomer, for taking the time. I'm aware that you had a very colorful medical career, and I'm very excited to hear more about it. I know that you studied medicine in Tel Aviv, and then your path took you almost across the entire globe. So I want to start off with hearing a little bit more about, you told me that you spent some time in Patagonia not too long after your studies. How did that happen, and where can people sign up for that?
Well, first of all, Carl, thanks for inviting me. I guess after I did medical school here in Israel and did my year of internship. And then in Israel, also there's obligatory military service, which most people do immediately after high school. But there's also an option of going and acquiring a profession first. And so I went to med school, and then I had to serve in the military as a doctor for a few years. That was also a long and complicated story that we might not go into. But when I finished that, I kind of felt like I needed to leave here. I basically Googled doctor remote, and then discovered this world of if you're a physician and you have a little bit of clinical experience, then there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do. And I basically joined this operation, which was basically organized these expeditions that worked with conservation biology researchers in South America. And they needed medics, and so I was kind of the medic on the team. The thing that I was part of, it was kind of a combination between kind of adventure tourism and science. And so people generally, mostly from Europe and the UK, would kind of sign up to come and join the expedition, and we would all go out together into the wilderness and work on research projects, various stuff like mapping condoreras, which is where condors nest on kind of these huge cliffs, or tracking wild boar, doing fauna and flora surveys. There was not a lot of medicine involved because most people were very healthy. Awesome opportunity to live out in nature and do a lot of cool stuff and get to go places where a lot of people don't get to go, and also kind of experience the place from that particular aspect of the biology and the research. Yeah, and
Yeah,
then
interesting. And it sounds like, I mean, you were a medic for I assume the crew and the tourists who came along, the adventure tourists that you mentioned. So in that sense, maybe you didn't learn that much medically, but at least you were exposed to research, even though it was not medical.
yeah.
Do you feel that, first of all, were you actually part of this because you had some downtime, so you could actually contribute to the research that they did? And if so, did that re help you in any way with your later medical research?
Yeah, I mean, it was nice because you get because scientific research is scientific research. It's kind of runs along the same lines with the same principles, and it was nice to see how other disciplines go about it. And yeah, my involvement together with the rest of the crew and everybody who participated was mainly in data collection. I did spend some time in a place called Cayos Cuchinos, which is these keys off the coast of Honduras that are they're basically only it's a nature reserve that's only accessible to scientists, where they do a lot of marine biology research. And so yeah, so I went out with the scientists on dives, and I learned to identify whatever they were working on, whether it was fish or any kind of marine fauna. And yeah, so it was interesting and fun. And I did think that if I were ever to do it again, then and knowing what I know, that I might try to actually come up with my own research project, because
Yeah.
it's definitely possible, and there's enough time to do it.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, and some of these things, I mean, when I was there, there were also um, uh, medical students who came, and so there was also this kind of uh, 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 part of the job was kind of tutoring medical students and kind of running kind of this basically dive clinic.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Interesting. I mean, this was all quite early after you graduated from medical school and completed your military service, which I believe was 3 years. So, but still very early in your medical career, and having had this experience of being, somewhat free floating in a system that is not as strict maybe as the hospital world. Did you feel that it shaped in any way your future career and the way that you would approach it? That experience in Patagonia or off the coast of Honduras, diving and doing biology research?
Yeah, I mean, I would say two things. One is that I had this, in most of, the Western or the Northern world, the usual trajectory is you go to medical school, you do an internship, and then you go immediately into residency before you start practicing independently. I had this opportunity to have had some experience in practicing independently through my military service, and so I was able to do these things before actually going through residency. So so it was. Uh, at some point, I realized it's a little bit, I've been doing too much cowboy medicine, and maybe I should, get some proper training first. And so I started navigating back towards the regular track and going to residency. But it was definitely an opportunity to practice more of what I had imagined medicine would be when I was a kid and thinking about being a doctor. Or, my grandfather was a doctor, so kind of, being a real generalist, where you try to develop the skills to manage anything. But I think that the main thing that I learned is humility, and realize that it's important to know your limits, and really important to be responsible to get trained to the best skills that you're ever able to acquire, and to always learn to recognize when you need help, and when you need to seek out consultation. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm from a probably more the conventional. I went on a more conventional medical track, right? Going to university, and pretty much immediately after that, with a little break, starting my residency training, and being used to being guided basically from the beginning. So I find it impressive that you, even though you said when you went on this expedition, right, there wasn't any medical emergencies, but at the end of the day, it was on you, and you had to find a solution, and maybe you were
Yeah.
the only person there making a call when it came down to
Yeah.
making a medical decision, which is something that you need to learn, and maybe that you were prepared for because you were used to not receiving a lot of training. But you
Yeah,
mentioned, yeah.
I think that when you look at the way medical training is done in different places in the world, uh, there's quite a wide range of between autonomy and supervision to the trainee. Right? Where I eventually trained in the US, I would say it would be on the higher spectrum of supervision. The medical training culture in some places where I've trained in Israel, I think from what I'm hearing, also in Europe and in Germany, there's more. The trainees get more independence more early on, and each
Yeah.
of those things comes with its benefits and also disadvantages, right? So I do believe that getting thrown in the water to some degree, really, you learn more when you just need to keep your head above water by your own devices. And you learn more quickly to make independent judgments and make clinical calls. And I think that's required to some degree during your training. But it can definitely, and it often is, too much independence.
Yeah.
And so I think that eventually I was glad to have had the benefit of both, to have trained in a system and then practice a little bit in places where I did have a lot of independence, but also um, I had a chance of training in the US, where there was a lot of opportunity for supervision and from learning from others, and also for having, kind of based on prior experience, having the eyes to kind of recognize from the medical culture that you're seeing around you the things that you want to adopt and you think are good, but also things that you might be critical of. And so I think that by the time I actually got to residency, I was more mature as a doctor, and I think that uh, I probably learned more and was able to take more advantage of it than if I had come at it, straight out of medical school.
And did you feel by the time you started residency and you were in a system, in an academic hospital in Boston, surrounded by residents that I assume hadn't reached that level of autonomy in their career at that point, did you feel a bit like the odd one out? First of all, being a little bit older than them, and being used to making the shots, whereas in the system you're required to probably double check most times.
Yeah. I mean, to a degree, I definitely felt like the odd one out for many reasons because I came from a different culture, different life experience. I was, on average 10 years older than my co-residents. But I think that I very quickly learned uh, how absolutely everyone has things to teach me. I learned that, you need to put ego aside and, some of my attending, some of my supervisors and teachers were younger than me or had started medical school later than me. But they also knew a lot of stuff that I didn't know. And so, yeah. And so I really felt, and again, I had the privilege of training in a really good place, and it didn't bother me for a moment. I mean, I just realized that there's so much to learn, there's so many smart people around me, and that I just need to take the opportunity and try to absorb as much as I can.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
And so, I mean, you had this first moment after completing your military service of going out into the world, and then you got somewhat settled in Boston in your residency. You had a program to complete. Afterwards, how long did it take for you to be drawn out into the world again, and what were your next steps to do it?
Pretty immediately. So basically, I did uh, a few years of this expedition stuff. I at a pretty early point, I realized that I wanted to go practice in more resource limited settings. Um, and so I decided I'll go to London to do a master's in international health and tropical medicine. And I first went and worked in clinics in Africa just to make enough money to afford the tuition and life in London. So I worked like for a private company that ran clinics there for almost a year. And then I went to London to study. And then even going to the US, it was out of the realization that in order to find opportunities in global health, it would be easier for me through the US system than through the system at home. And so eventually, when I went for residency, I went for residency in a program that I knew had a global health element. And basically, the the hospital that I worked in was part of the Harvard system, and through something called the Botswana Harvard Partnership, they had this collaboration with the medical system in Botswana. And when I finished residency, I stayed on as faculty in the same program, and then I kind of took over running this program in Botswana. And so immediately after finishing residency, I moved to Botswana.
And it seems like that you already picked the residency program in the US with the thought in your mind that this would enable you to pursue the path of a more public health focused career. Is that something that you, in hindsight, would recommend to others who are interested in this path? Would you, no matter where they come from, suggest that going through an American academic hospital is the way to go, after having met so many people in that field?
Yeah, first of all, I have to say, it's not, pick is very nice, but I think as a lot of international medical graduates discover, it's not so easy. And I was just incredibly fortunate and had a lot of luck to be able uh, to eventually wind up training there. I think it's one path. I mean, so these days, some kind of global health involvement is something very popular, and programs in the U.S. to attract residents often will have as part of the training some kind of opportunity during residency where you can go abroad and practice. And there's a lot of academic centers in the U.S. who develop, global health centers or some kind of collaboration with some kind of international collaboration. So it has become a much more common um, part in academic U.S. medicine, and also more of an established career path even
Mhm.
in the U.S. system. But I think that similar things exist in other places. In Charité in Germany, in Berlin, in the UK, in Switzerland. So I don't think the US is the only path available. And I think that a lot of people have this fantasy about going and working abroad or working in more resource limited settings or trying to contribute to places that are trying to develop their medical system, um, and uh, and you know and then sometimes it's difficult to understand how you can actually go about doing that. And so, one way is really through kind of an academic center that already has an involvement, but there are other pathways. There's the NGO pathway, organizations like Médecins du Monde or Médecins Sans Frontières and many other NGOs which recruit volunteers. There is the local academic pathway. So in a lot of countries around the world that have medical schools, and they actually often are looking for faculty to come and teach there. And so I also know people who just made a direct connect, even in Botswana, made a direct connection with the local medical school in the University of Botswana, and were hired there. Um, um, so I think the main point to me is to realize that there's also you know a lot of medical voluntarism out there, which is these opportunities to go somewhere for 2 weeks and practice a little medicine. And I think and some of those are very serious, but I think there's a lot of things that are uh, often made more for the people who are coming than
Mhm.
for what you're trying to contribute locally. And I think that's the important thing.
Yeah.
You want to really look with a very critical view at the program and what you're looking to do, and realize that to make any kind of impact anywhere, it's a long-term game.
Yeah.
You have to be some part of something that's long term, and the more you are tied to a place, the more you spend time there, get familiar with the culture, with the language, with the system around you, the more you're likely to contribute, and the more you're likely to avoid the many, many uh, things that can go wrong, or things that you can actually make worse without even being aware of. So I think, either you yourself are willing to commit for the long term, or at least you find some kind of opportunity that's part of a long-term game that utilizes,
Mm.
that has people who are long-term on the ground, and if you're coming for a shorter period, they can kind of guide you and kind of guide you into the system in a way where you are, for the time that you're there, you're going to contribute to the long-term work that
Yeah.
they're doing, and they're giving you enough of the support and your orientation to make you effective, rather than somebody who comes, to somewhere where you don't know anything about the local circumstances, because that can be very problematic.
And you had a longer time to adjust and actually contribute also to the long-term um yeah benefit or effect of the hospital that you worked in. I want to hear more about that. But first, you mentioned kind of the urge that many people have to work in places with limited resources. And I wonder, in your case, do you remember your motivation behind that wish to be in a place that was unlike the place where you trained medicine, unlike the place where you studied medicine, that had limited resources? Can you can you explain to yourself even like what that yeah, maybe that urge or thrill to be in a place like that and contribute there, where that was founded, grounded?
Yeah, I mean, I remember very well even the moment when I realized that was what I was going to do, and it was more to do with, I think, somewhere in my mid-20s, somewhere in the middle of my medical school, and I just had more of kind of, it was more on the existential lines, or you know, I felt like often the doctors that feature in Chekhov, in his stories and plays, they're often people, who are struggling to find meaning, and kind of come to the conclusion that the only meaning they can find is just to work hard, try to do something for other people, and get to the point at the end of every day where you're so tired that you just fall asleep, and you don't need to think about the meaning of life anymore. So there was that moment in my younger years. And also, I think later on, I just felt, especially when I was training in the US, I just felt, it was really good training, but but I was surrounded by such amazing people with, there was such a richness of people who cared and invested in the work, and try to improve the system. And I just felt like that my relative weight there was very marginal, and I wanted to, and I knew that there were places where that are not fortunate to have this abundance, and I felt like it would be, I wanted to be somewhere where I can feel like I'm making a difference, a more substantial difference, right? When I was working in the US, I always knew that if I was sick and couldn't come to work, there would be somebody else who will replace me, and they'll probably do a much better job than me. And yeah.
And when you actually started working in Botswana, so you completed your master's in tropical medicine and international health, and you'd already gained experience working in Nigeria, so being on the African continent was nothing new, and being familiar with maybe some differences that you encountered towards the US system where you practiced before. How do you recall this transition to starting a new job in Botswana with where you knew it wasn't temporary in the sense you're just making money to afford the tuition for your master's,
Yeah.
but where you were actually to stay and to build something? How do you recall this transition period?
Yeah, I mean, really, I was so fortunate. It was such an amazing opportunity. I basically um, was hired in order to go and live in Botswana. I was kind of seconded to this secondary public hospital in one of the big villages in Botswana. Uh, and I wasn't given too much of a job description. It was basically from the people who hired me were the hospital in the US, and basically they wanted me to be faculty on the ground, uh, uh, so that they can send residents for rotations, and later on fellows as well. And otherwise, they gave me free rein to see to engage in what I thought would be appropriate. So I was really free to kind of try to around and recognize opportunities to help, and mainly to help build local capacity. And so when I got to the hospital, the hospitals at the time, at least in Botswana, most of the doctors who work in the Botswana system are doctors who have not gone through specialty training. So these are people who went to medical school, did an internship, and then start practicing more or less independently. And there's much less a specialist workforce than in other places, which is not unique to Botswana. It's the case in many places in Africa. So when I got to the district hospital where I was working, it was really basically the only specialists were myself, an internal medicine specialist, and an anesthesiologist. And so I kind of took over managing the internal medicine services in the hospital, and from that vantage point, doing a lot of clinical medicine, trying to help train the local medical officers who were working there, and then also uh, uh, you know making creating contacts with the local medical schools so that they could send medical students to rotate with us. Botswana was just kind of revamping its internship system, its national internship system. So I got involved in that, and was part of a process where internship was transitioned from being only in the two big tertiary medical centers to actually happening all over the country in the district hospitals, which is also where most people wind up practicing. So there was a lot of opportunities to contribute to medical education, and 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 then the other thing in Botswana is that Botswana is a very unique country. It had a unique history and post-independence trajectory compared to a lot of other countries in Africa, um, where it's a country that's much less troubled by ethnic strife. It's a very peaceful country. It had the kind of double fortune of when it started out as an independent country. Before that, it was a British protectorate.
Hmm.
It got independence in the mid 60s. It was one of the poorest countries in the world at the time. And about a year after independence, the largest diamond deposit in the world was discovered there. And that type of resources, which in many other places, especially in Africa, turned out to be a curse because it drove a lot of violence and corruption. Botswana had a very kind of united people and very forward-looking leadership, and so the government actually invested the income from those resources in building a proper welfare state and in building, amongst other things, a medical system. And so what I found in Botswana is actually a medical system that's very wide and widely accessible to people and reaches, even the smallest villages. And my impression was that while the resources of this medical system are definitely less than in many places in Europe and the US, we had most medication classes. You can get a CT and even an MRI, but it's not going to be in your hospital. You're going to need to, at the time there was 2 CT machines and 1 MRI machine in the country, so you would have to transfer. So resources would be there, but I found that there is a lot of inefficiency in the way resources are utilized, and so the main effort of my work was less in increasing resources and more in trying to focus on how we can use the resources that we have to improve healthcare.
Yeah.
Out of a sense that we can that the system can do a lot better with what it has. And so I got involved together with a lot of wonderful colleagues in really trying to develop kind of quality improvement projects that are focused on improved resource utilization.
And
that was a long answer to a question I no longer recall.
So yeah, thanks for the overview on what you did there, and it got me thinking. I'm not sure who said it. I thought it might be Bill Gates who said we overestimate what we can achieve in a year, but underestimate what we can achieve in a decade. Now, you weren't there for quite a decade yet, but I think it was 7 years that you spent in Botswana. And throughout that time, if you look back on it now, do you feel that not only your work had an impact, but also that the health system moved forward in a way where you said that you would say you left it better than you found it?
So that's a very good question. And the answer is complicated and probably worth several podcasts of its own. But I can't give you like a resounding positive answer to that question. I think that once you find yourself on the ground, you realize really how fraught the challenges are. And how much of what you do and what you are trying to achieve depends really on issues of governance, and on really big picture systematic issues, on medical culture, and how difficult it is to change things. You also discover things that are often, sometimes uncomfortable to talk about, like, there's this ideal. I guess the ideal that's painted if you go and do a master's in global health in some northern university. Then the ideal that's painted about this type of engagement is that, we are going to come from the north or from, more well-resourced countries. We will bring our goodwill and our and the knowledge and skills we've had the benefit to develop. We will sit down with the local people and the representatives of the local system, and try to understand what their own goals are, where they would like to take their system, whether it's their clinic or their hospital or the whole medical system, and then with their lead and the goals that they put forward, we will use our skills to advance them. On the ground, what you often discover is that the picture is more murky than that. Often, people there are working in a very stunted system that's kind of done things in a certain way for a very long time, a system that has very, very little carrots and sticks. And many people are very poorly paid. And so the often you don't find the motivation that you would have hoped to find to actually change things. You also encounter a lot of complacency. People get used. It happens to all of us. You get used to doing things a certain way, and you sometimes lose kind of the eyes to actually see what's wrong or what could be made better. And so I feel like with time, I had to develop a lot of humility about what could be achieved, about how to achieve it. I found myself encountering a lot of dilemmas. So for example, I will say, in the public system that I worked in, certainly in the hospital that I worked in, and in many of the clinics I worked in, the work atmosphere is very relaxed. Often with the eyes of somebody who came from the US, it seems like people lack a sense of urgency. And it's very easy to fall into a place where you're criticizing, where you're trying to invigorate people, or where you think people are not doing enough, or not making enough of an effort, and especially early on, you don't have enough perspective to understand, everything that's behind that, to understand, these are people who need to. I'm talking about the local healthcare workers need to survive in this system for the next, 40 years. They often work in a system that actually discourages innovation and discourages people from expressing initiative. And also, people, they have a different sense of like work-life balance, and also in work being more joyful and relaxed. And it's not, the more time I spent there, the more I doubted whether I need to come and recommend the type of culture and the type of attitude that I brought with me from the West. So I feel like the more time I spent there, the more I actually had doubts about what I was doing, and the more I realized that change is going to be difficult, and that you really need to adopt a more kind of geological time frame, and that many things really depend on really much wider issues, which is kind of the sense of democracy, the sense of accountability that the public system in general has, and a lot depends on politics and what local people choose to struggle for, and it's very difficult and impossible, and to and in a certain degree presumptuous to come, from outside and and recommend changes. So do I think I left something behind me or made an impact? The program that I helped build is still there. There's a wonderful doctor who replaced me and is leading it. We've had a chance to train many local graduates of the local medical school. Some of them we've encouraged, and they've gone on to do residency. So I think, I definitely feel like we had impact on patients, on individual patients. I think on a lot of young medical trainees, where we were able to kind of role model and teach. And I'm still in contact with many of them and hear back from them. And I know that they got a lot of inspiration from this kind of collaboration and getting exposed to people from other places in the world. And in terms of wider system changes, I hope that we started to make a dent.
Mm.
Um, uh, and I also, Botswana recently had an election. The party that won all of the previous elections and was in power, for many years since independence, has been replaced by the opposition. I definitely think that's a sign that the people in Botswana are looking for change and want to see that their government services improving. And so I'm optimistic, but the optimism, really comes from my sense of the really, amazing people in Botswana and what they have in them, and less from what I think programs like the program I did can contribute. I think we can contribute, but but it really, as supporters of what of where the local people are going to take things.
You at one point made the decision to leave Botswana behind. You've been across the globe practicing medicine in different systems and decided at one point to go back to Tel Aviv. How is this decision influenced, and how long did it take you to realize that you want to be back where you started out from?
Yeah. I think it has to do both with my sense that in Botswana, I was, like I said in the beginning, I was very much in the liberty to run things. And I found myself in this leadership position. Um, um, and I think I realized with time that it's probably not good to be the leader for too long, both because you start to lose kind of those fresh eyes that recognize opportunities and have kind of the energy to drive change. And so I felt there comes a point where it would be right for somebody fresh to come along. On the one hand, I was also very tired, and in to some extent kind of burnt out, because the actual clinical work there is hard. There's endless need. There's a lot of good medicine that you can do, but it takes a lot of effort and struggle to deliver it to patients. And I felt like I was getting to the end of my rope. And then also at that point I had been away from home, where my family is, where my parents are, and a lot of my friends are for almost a decade and a half, and so I felt it was time to hand over to somebody else and go home.
And then back in Israel, your work focus changed a little bit again. You embarked on non like patient work as well as a physician, but continued to work with patients in different settings. I know that you've participated in a program called Physicians for Human Rights. Can you tell me how that transition happened and what you were doing there?
Yeah, so when I moved back here, like I said, I was a little bit exhausted from clinical medicine and try to find something to do that would be a little bit less stressful. And I was incredibly lucky to find a job with Amboss, a medical education company, which has me basically working as a content editor. Um, um, and that has also enabled me to earn a living and then have a lot of also time free to invest in other things. And so yeah, Physicians for Human Rights is a medical human rights organization that I had been involved with even in my younger years and as a medical student. It's basically an organization that tries to promote the right to healthcare everywhere that's under the responsibility of the Israeli government. So that means within Israel and also within the territories occupied by Israel, the West Bank and Gaza, and also the rights of a lot of undocumented immigrants and refugees in Israel. So it was natural for me. And as soon as I came back, I also came back. It was right at the height of the Corona epidemic, just when it began.
Mm.
And so a lot of the volunteers that were involved were busy in the hospitals. And so I basically came and immediately offered my time. Yeah, and so the clinical involvement there is in a free clinic in Jaffa that serves mainly the significant population of undocumented immigrants and refugees, mainly from these days, mainly from Eritrea and Sudan
Mhm.
that are here, and unfortunately, don't get the right to healthcare that should be guaranteed to refugees by the Israeli government. And so I work or volunteer as a doctor in that clinic, and also PHR organizes these regular mobile clinics in the West Bank,
Mhm.
uh, where also there's a very under-resourced and limited medical system, and so trying to help with the struggles of Palestinian people
Yeah.
there.
And it's hard to imagine for people who've never been to that area, what the daily life, and especially your life when you're working in the West Bank with a mobile clinic looks like, because of a situation that fortunately a lot of people don't have to kind of undergo, right? Because it's just getting into the West Bank is I assume not as simple as crossing any other border. For instance, in Europe, where I live, when having a European passport. So maybe can you paint a little bit of picture of what the daily work in the West Bank looks like when you travel there with the mobile clinic?
Yeah. So, I mean, as as you know, the the situation in the occupied West Bank is has grown worse with the years, and Israeli occupation there, um, has become permanent, and with time, what amounts to a system of apartheid has been established, where in the same kind of territory there are Jewish Israeli citizens in settlements who enjoy all of the rights Israeli citizens anywhere, participating in democracy and complete freedom of movement. Whereas Palestinians are living under occupation, under severe movement restrictions, with their life essentially controlled by Israel. The Palestinian Authority, which was established initially as a temporary step towards Palestinian statehood back with the Oslo Accords in the 90s, has become permanent, and but without independence, and with time it has become very inefficient, with a lot of corruption and also with constant undermining of any ability to govern by Israel. The result is when you look at the life experienced by Palestinians in the West Bank and compare it to life that Israelis experience either in the West Bank itself or in Israel, it's it's very different, and certainly from the health point of view, people are getting much poorer health care and lack all of the basic determinants of health. And this situation has grown worse gradually. And certainly in the past year, since October 7th, with the war, it has grown much worse, with much more restriction of movement, a lot more violence towards Palestinians, both by the Israeli army and by settlers. Um, um, yeah, so
Yeah,
that's kind
maybe
of
just a little bit of just some background information because I'm not sure if everyone's aware. You mentioned the Oslo Accords in the 90s, which were actually part of a peace process back at the time where negotiations happened between the Palestinians under Yasser Arafat and the Israeli side represented by Yitzhak Rabin. And like you said, the Palestinian Authority was established for the time being to basically represent the Palestinian side uh, in the interim until negotiating like a permanent solution for the two sides. Unfortunately, this ended up not happening. Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, I think, by a Jewish nationalist who opposed the peace process, and there were other reasons. And we know that the history in Israel and the conflict between Israel and Palestine has been like ongoing for centuries. So it's a little bit difficult to resolve, but maybe like from your standpoint, saying that that you I mean, you're working with both sides. Like you're kind of you work in Israel, and you also as an Israeli, you have a bit more freedom to move as well in the West Bank, and you get to be in both sides. And you mentioned also something to me prior to this conversation that you were involved in something called protective presence, which you can maybe explain in a moment. But is there from your side? Um, After the attacks in on October 7th last year, uh, it seems like a little bit hopeless from the outside, and it's really difficult to assess from my point of view. Living in Germany, we get the news, but we don't have kind of an the inside view that you have. Do you see any silver lining, any reason why this conflict has the chance to be resolved in maybe not the near future, but at all? Is there like any glimpse of hope that you have from inside this on the ground?
You know, this past year has been so horrendous and continues to be. It's very hard to find anything to hold on to maintain hope. I'm sitting now in Tel Aviv. A 40-minute drive from here is the Gaza Strip. People there are living under just unimaginable conditions. It's completely destroyed. Houses, healthcare facilities, people are living in tents. The attacks are continuing to go on. More than 40,000 people have been killed, the vast majority of whom are civilians. In recent weeks, Israel has re-attacked the north of Gaza, has basically driven out the population there. It's just unimaginable. From the healthcare perspective, the healthcare system there that had always been struggling is virtually non-existent, and it's just horror upon horror. So many injured. There's just nothing to treat them with. There's no way to conduct operations because there's no anesthesia. There's no electricity. And so the situation is urgent and dire. It's not getting better. It's getting worse. And so it's hard to talk about hope in this situation. I think that, if you want kind of the bigger picture is that, we don't have time to go, into all of the details of the very complex history, but at bottom, I think that people on both sides are driven by fear, fear that is legitimate, but that fear from what you think the other side will do to you, prevents you from seeing the humanity on the other side, and the degree. I'm talking now about the process in the Israeli society, because that's the society that I belong to, and I feel, I share in its responsibility. The degree of dehumanization of Palestinians that, to some degree has always been there, but in the past year has been so extreme. Certainly the nature of the attacks committed by Hamas on October 7th, and the fact that it was targeting civilians certainly didn't do anything to help that. Israeli media is completely self-censored and serves the propaganda of the Israeli government. So Israelis are not exposed to the media to what is going on in Gaza. Of course, we live in a world where if you want to know, you can know. It's all over. But many people just don't want to know, so that they can keep feeling like what the Israeli state and Israeli army is doing is justified. And the Israeli government is completely intransigent, and it doesn't look like there's any openness to changing policy. So, uh, again, at this point, at this point, I think, and again, I don't want because we don't have time to go into the nuances of the situation, but and I also realize that I speak, you know, the view that I represent is definitely not representative of most Israelis. There's probably a very small minority of Israelis who think like me, but at the moment, the acute crisis and suffering is vastly on the Palestinian side. Um, it needs to stop, and I feel like the only hope for it to stop is if the international community does what it can to force the Israeli government to change course. Um, uh, Again, in the end, the Israeli government is the sovereign between the river and the sea. It is the party with the power. For the past year, it's been engaged in really brutal attacks in violation of international law and human rights. And I think that, the international community, and especially governments like the government of Germany and the US, who have been kind of uncritically supporting Israel, have to change their policy towards Israel so that ceasefire is achieved as soon as possible. Every day when that doesn't happen costs literally costs in the lives of tens and hundreds of people. You only hear about the number of dead, but you need to realize that number represents a much higher number of people who are affected, who will be affected for the rest of their lives, of more people who are dying and will die, if not from direct attacks, than from malnutrition, from lack of health care. So, the crisis is beyond imminent. Yeah, and so I don't, I don't think it's just not time now to talk about big hope. It's time now to do something to just stop the violence and the killing.
Yeah. Yeah, you did mention nuance, and I think it's an important aspect of what we're in need of, right? Because it feels like there are opposing sides that have very strong arguments that are based on their respective agendas, and don't allow for kind of anything that is beyond the black and white image. I wouldn't say that like I don't want to accuse everyone of not being nuanced. Like to the truth is also that you mentioned the German and the US government, that there is nuance, and there's also a critique of the Israeli government, but oftentimes or sometimes it's a bit especially from a German perspective, there's a um, also historic hesitance towards criticizing Israel, which is comprehensible in my eyes. But all the more, it's important to hear to
Yeah.
hear the problems that people on the ground
I
report.
think I think for me, the message that I would like people around the world, and especially in Germany, and I understand the sensitivities. I understand the almost by now instinctive kind of affinity and support people feel and responsibility towards the Jewish people. My message is that it's just important to understand that, supporting the Jewish people, supporting Jews' right to live in safety does not equal supporting the Israeli government. And
Mm.
and again, this is my view. I think that for decades, the Israeli government has, while saying that it's looking out for the best interests of at least Jews, it has done consistently the opposite. The best interest of Jews in Palestine and Israel is also the best interest of Palestinians. There is not going to be any free and safe life here for anyone unless everybody's rights are recognized. And so supporting everybody, both Jews and Palestinians, it requires pressure on the Israeli government, because I think, again, it's not, I'm sure there's things to criticize on both sides, but the sovereign, the strong party is the Israeli side, and the responsibility and the onus is on the Israeli side to change course. The other thing to say is that it seems banal, but violence is just not a solution. This is this is the lesson that we're learning, and we're being forced to learn again and again and again. There's this view, this kind of security mindset view that the way to protect yourself is by using more violence. And what history has proven again and again and again is that violence breeds violence.
Mm.
And I think, everybody who cares about this region and the people living here needs to do what they can in order to stop the violence. It's the first and basic step towards any kind of solution.
Yeah. Well, I think we could continue this conversation for a long time, and I believe it's difficult to to get a full picture in the little time that we got. But I still feel it's valuable to get this inside view and to hear your opinion, and to hear it from someone who's actually building bridges to the other side in a time where more often than not uh, the two parties of Israelis and Palestinians are scared of each other, right? Like you said, a lot of this is based on fear of the other party, and so people like you going to the West Bank and helping the vulnerable as a medical professional, which is, ultimately the thing that we know best, having undergone such an intensive training, I think is extremely inspiring. And thank you very much, Tomer, for sharing your story with us.
Thanks very much, Carl, for your interest. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Medical Portraits. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more inspiring stories from the world of medicine, make sure to subscribe to the podcast. See you in 2 weeks.